Welcome to Natural Horsemanship Solutions. I'm Lindsay Forkin and this is Bronson we have here today. Bronson was brought to me as part of the horse rescue series. He was given to me by Heaven Can Wait Equine Rescue, and he came with a few issues, one of them being bridling. He just has a little bit of trust issues when it comes to the bridle. So today I'm going to show you how to work with a horse that has some bridling issues. So the first thing that I'm going to do doesn't even have anything to do with the bridle at all, but first I have to teach Bronson to lower his head when pressure is applied above his head. So you'll notice I'm doing two things. One, when I'm asking him to lower his head, I'm pulling down gently on the rope halter. And then the other was I was pressing down on his pole. Now, if your horse has got such issues that they won't even let you touch above their ears, then you'll notice what I'm doing here now is I'm using my stick. So you have to remember that the reward is in the release. So the moment that I stop touching Bronson needs to be because he did the right thing and not because he just reached his head way too tall for me to be able to keep touching him. So when you use the stick, it gives you more reach. So it's not intended to hurt the horse, it's just so that way you can have the confidence and the reach to stay touching the horse until they're still, and then you can move the stick away to reward, and then you can see I'm touching him again, and when he's still for a little bit, then I take the stick away and rub lower down on his neck, and then I approach again. So I just have to make sure that when I go to touch Bronson that he listens and that I be patient and persistent until he does lower his head. Otherwise, what I'm going to teach him is that when I touch above his head that he can just raise his head really tall and just avoid me altogether. So after we've retrained Bronson so that way when he feels the pressure on top of his head, that means lower his head, the next thing we need to do is be able to touch his nose. So there's no point trying to stick some cold piece of metal into Bronson's mouth if he doesn't even like having my hand near his mouth. My hand's warm and very friendly and soft, and the bit is cold and it's hard and it's not as comfortable. So it's easier to first get him comfortable with just my hand going next to his mouth before we even try to go for the bit. So it's the same idea that the reward is in the release. So I approach Bronson and I touch near his lips, and when he's still, then I take my hand away. So I wait for him to be still, and then as soon as he's still, I take it away. And then I'll try again, and I'll massage his lips a little bit. And if he's raising his head up, I'm not going to get mad at him, I'm not going to hit him. I just wait for him to be still and where I want, and then I remove my hand. And then I'll stroke him a little bit again and remove my hand. And sometimes I'll stroke him a little bit longer, sometimes a little bit less, just so that way he doesn't get into some sort of a routine where he thinks, okay, I'm going to handle 1 second, but not 1 second more. So sometimes I do 3 seconds of rubbing, sometimes I do just half a second. But if we ever get into this head tossing business that he's doing here, as soon as he's correct, I'll remove just to reward him. So then you can see that we're getting into where I'm starting to massage his lips a little bit more and then starting to move my fingers into his mouth a little bit. And this is the next step. So when I am putting my fingers into his mouth, I'm just going to very briefly, just on the inside of his cheek, and I'm going in the area where the horse doesn't have any teeth. So I've never actually been bitten when I do this exercise, but I always make sure that my fingers are just in the side, just going on the inside of the lip, not sticking my hand all the way in his mouth, and not going anywhere near the teeth that are at the front or the back, just somewhere in the middle. And so we've done on his right side of his face, and so now I'm going to be working with the left side. It's important that you can do this on both sides of the horse. Whatever you do to one side, you need to be able to do to the other, and that helps you to create a horse that's balanced and that listens. So now that he's comfortable with that, it's time to introduce the bridle. So I'm going to start with asking Bronson to keep his head low. And again, we're going to remember that the reward is in the release. So I'm going to approach with the bridle. If he's still and he's got his head down the way he does here, you can see I'm stroking his neck and telling him he's good. And then I actually lowered the bridle to give him a moment of reward. And then I'll advance a little bit again. And you can see I pause there to rub him and tell him that he's good. And so then I'm reaching down and asking him to think about taking the bit. And all I did was bring the bridle up to his nose, and he didn't toss his head or anything. So to reward him, I take the bridle away and stroke his neck, and then we try again. And so I offer the bit to him again and just hold it in front of his nose. He didn't choose to take the bit, but he didn't toss his head, so that's still a good thing. So I'm still going to take the bridle away and reward him and tell him that that's what I want him to do. Especially when you're working with a horse that's been particularly difficult bridling, it's important to reward these little baby steps of just being able to bring the bridle near him without having him toss his head way up in the air and thrash his head about. A lot of the problems that people get into when they're working with horses, it's because they don't reward these little steps, so they provoke the horse to a point of needing to throw their head up and be violent and thrashing around because the person ignored those little signs of anxiety. So he did bring his head up a little bit here, so I'm just going to be persistent and patient and wait for him to lower his head, and then once he's low, then I take my hand away and rub him to tell him he's a good boy. So you want to be very careful that when he is bringing his head up, that I keep the pressure consistent until he's where I want him to be, and then that's when he gets the release, because that's the reward. So I'm asking again now, I'm just offering gently, he's moving his head a little bit, and then he was still, so I take it away. And so this mostly just takes a lot of patience and just being careful to reward the horse instead of punishing the horse. Sometimes what people do is they get excited when they can put the bit near the horse, and then they will force the horse's mouth open by sticking the fingers inside of the horse's mouth and tickling their tongue, which causes the horse to open their mouth. And all that does is create more anxiety and can actually make the problem a lot worse because the horse gets nervous about letting you get near their mouth. So I don't force him to take the bit, I just offered it in front of him, and you can see this time Bronson decided he would take the bit, and that's great. So then I put it in and pulled the bridle over his face, but I didn't force his mouth open, he chose to take that there. And then you can see I finished by lowering his head, just reminding him that he's always supposed to keep his head low. So when it comes to taking the bridle off, I still want that same soft expression. I still want him to keep his head nice and low, and you can see the little twitch in Bronson's ears there. He was a little bit worried, a little bit uncomfortable about what was going on there, so I just slow it down. Sometimes people, they don't care too much about taking the bridle off, and they forget these little steps, but you still want to be looking for those little signs of anxiety. And so you can see I'm taking my time and I want to do it right. So I'm asking him to keep his head low. I'm slowly moving the bridle off of his ears. And then I'll let Bronson drop the bit out of his mouth. I won't pull the bit out of his mouth. And then I'll ask him to keep his head low again. So just always reminding him, keep your head low, please, and then rewarding him for doing the right thing. So once we've done it one time, it's important to do it again, just so that he knows that the bridle doesn't always mean riding, that you can put on the bridle and take it out and then put it back in, and do it a few times, just so that way he knows that it's nothing special. It doesn't mean that he's going to get tugged or pulled on in his mouth. It's just something simple and easy. And so you can see he took the bit quite well there. And then I can put it over his ears again. And then I'll just remind him, keep your head low, please. Really wanting him to just remember that he needs to keep his head at my level, and then that way I'm not reaching all the way up tall. And then I'll slowly take the bridle off again, keeping sure that his head stays low. So as soon as his head pops up, I just ask him to lower it back down and slowly take the bridle out. You want to make sure you take the bridle off gently and ask the horse to keep their head low, so that way they understand that they're supposed to just stay at your height, and also that you're patient. So you can see he's licking his lips, he's thinking about it, letting out a yawn. So these are all signs of him just relaxing, which is great. So we're just going to keep working with this. And thank you for watching, and just remember to take your time, be patiently persistent, and just remember that the reward is in the release. And best of luck.